A CEO is being kidnapped in plain sight, and only the janitor knows. In the glittering heart of Manhattan's most exclusive hotel, a woman worth $500 million is walking toward her own destruction. No one sees the gun pressed against her ribs. No one notices the terror behind her perfect smile. Except for one man, a single father who spent years learning to see what others miss, who understands the desperate language of silence, and who now faces an impossible choice: stay invisible and safe, or risk everything to save a stranger's life. If you want to see how courage hides in the most unexpected places, stay until the end. And please, hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Harrington Crown Hotel didn't just occupy space in Manhattan, it commanded it. 27 stories of limestone and glass, crowned with Art Deco flourishes that caught the morning sun and threw it back in golden defiance. Inside, the lobby stretched like a cathedral of wealth, marble floors polished to mirrors, crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses, and the kind of hushed elegance that made even whispers feel like violations. Daniel Reed had worked in this temple of privilege for 6 years, and he had become a master of invisibility. At 42, he moved through the Harrington spaces like water, present but unnoticed, essential but unseen. His gray maintenance uniform blended into walls and corners. His quiet efficiency made him forgettable. Guests looked through him. Management barely registered his presence. And that was exactly how Daniel preferred it. This particular Thursday morning found him in the east wing of the main lobby, methodically working his mop across marble that already gleamed. The repetitive motion was meditative: dip, wring, sweep, repeat. His hands moved with practiced precision while his mind drifted to more important things. Lily's parent-teacher conference next week, the rent due on Friday, whether he could afford to replace her worn-out shoes before winter really set in. "Daddy always says I'm good at watching," Lily had told him last night, her small hands forming the signs with careful deliberation. "He says I see things other people miss." Daniel had smiled and signed back, "Because you taught me to look with more than just my eyes." It was true. 8 years of raising a deaf daughter had rewired Daniel's entire perception of the world. He'd learned to read the shift of shoulders that meant anger, the tension in hands that signaled fear, the micro-expressions that flashed across faces before people remembered to lie. Lily had taught him that communication lived in gesture and posture, in the space between words, in the things people tried desperately not to say. The lobby's grandfather clock struck 9:30. Daniel glanced up from his work, taking in the morning's usual tableau: concierge staff greeting arriving guests, businessmen hurrying toward the conference wing, a couple arguing in hushed tones near the elevators. Everything normal, everything ordinary. Then the front entrance doors swept open, and Daniel's trained observation caught something that made his hand still on the mop handle. Evelyn Cross walked through those doors like she owned them, which, in a sense, she did. CEO of Crosstech Industries, board member of half a dozen Fortune 500 companies, a woman whose decisions affected thousands of lives and billions of dollars. Daniel had seen her before, of course. The Harrington Crown was her preferred hotel when business brought her to Manhattan, and the staff spoke her name with the kind of reverence usually reserved for royalty. But something was wrong. Daniel's eyes, trained by years of watching his daughter's careful observations, picked up the discordance immediately. Evelyn Cross walked with her usual confidence, spine straight, shoulders back, each step measured and purposeful. Her charcoal suit was impeccable, her silver hair swept into an elegant twist. To anyone glancing casually, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman of extraordinary power moving through a world she controlled, but her left hand, hanging at her side, trembled almost imperceptibly. The man beside her smiled and gestured as they walked, one hand occasionally touching her elbow in what appeared to be a collegial, guiding manner. Marcus Vail, her corporate attorney, Daniel had seen him before too, always impeccably dressed, always radiating the kind of smooth confidence that came from knowing exactly how much power a good lawyer could wield. Except Marcus Vail's other hand, the one partially obscured by his body, pressed against Evelyn Cross's lower back in a way that made Daniel's pulse quicken. The pressure was subtle but unmistakable, and Evelyn's spine held just a fraction too rigid beneath that touch. Daniel's mop continued its steady rhythm, but every sense had sharpened to focus. He'd learned long ago that the key to truly seeing was to never look like you were watching. His eyes tracked the pair's progression across the lobby, while his body language broadcast nothing but bored maintenance worker going through motions. They moved toward the private conference wing, the section of the hotel reserved for high-stakes business dealings, where soundproofed rooms and absolute discretion came standard. Evelyn's assistant should have been with her. Her security detail should have been visible. The usual entourage that accompanied a woman of her status was conspicuously absent. As they passed within 15 feet of Daniel's position, Evelyn's eyes swept across the lobby. For just a fraction of a second, her gaze landed on him, the invisible janitor, the man who might as well have been part of the furniture. And in that fraction of a second, her right hand moved. The gesture was so subtle, so brief, that anyone not trained to read sign language would have missed it entirely. But Daniel saw it clearly. The quick formation of letters against her thigh, partially hidden by the angle of her body. H-E-L-P. Then another sign, even more desperate, danger. And finally, her hand brushing against her side in the unmistakable gesture for weapon. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs, but years of careful control kept his face neutral, his movements steady. He watched Marcus Vale's hand press more firmly against Evelyn's back, saw the fractional shift in her posture that spoke of pain or pressure or fear. The attorney's smile never wavered as he guided her toward the conference wing's private entrance. Every instinct screamed at Daniel to react, to shout, to run for help. But he'd learned in his previous life, the one he'd left behind when Lily was born, that panic was the enemy of effective action. Security work had taught him that the first person to lose control was usually the first to lose everything. So instead, Daniel did what he did best. He became invisible, unremarkable, and utterly forgettable. He returned his attention to the floor, mopping with the same steady rhythm, just another maintenance worker in a luxury hotel where people like him were trained to be unseen. But his mind was racing. The weapon could be concealed in Vale's jacket, a small handgun pressed against Evelyn's ribs or spine, hidden by the angle of their bodies and the attorney's carefully positioned hand. Efficient, professional, the kind of thing someone with training would do. Which meant this wasn't impulsive. This was planned. Daniel's mop traced slow circles as he evaluated his options. The security office was on the second floor, accessible by staff elevators. He could reach it in under 3 minutes. But 3 minutes was an eternity if Vale decided Evelyn had outlived her usefulness, or if she tried to resist. The lobby security guard was stationed near the main entrance, too far away, and any obvious alarm would likely trigger whatever violence Vale was holding in reserve. No, direct intervention was out. Panic was out. Anything that revealed he'd seen, that he knew, would put Evelyn Cross in immediate lethal danger. So Daniel did something that would have seemed incomprehensible to anyone watching. He continued mopping, working his way slowly, methodically toward the conference wing, while his mind calculated angles and timing and possibilities. The grandfather clock ticked toward 9:35. The private conference wing had 3 access points: the main entrance where Vale was guiding Evelyn, a service entrance used by catering staff, and an emergency exit that would trigger alarms if opened. The rooms themselves were soundproofed, designed to prevent corporate espionage, which meant that once that door closed behind them, Evelyn's screams wouldn't reach anyone. Daniel's hand slipped into his maintenance cart, fingers finding his phone. He couldn't make a call, too obvious, too risky, but he could send a text to the security office, something that would get attention without causing immediate alarm. His thumb moved across the screen while his other hand kept the mop in motion. Suspicious activity, conference wing, private room 3, check cameras, silent approach. The message went to Miguel Reyes, head of security and one of the few people in the Harrington who actually saw Daniel as something more than background furniture. They'd shared coffee in the break room, traded stories about raising kids in Manhattan on working-class wages. Miguel would know that Daniel didn't send messages like this unless something was genuinely wrong. The phone vibrated almost immediately. Details? Daniel's response was brief. Possible coercion, woman in danger, weapon suspected, need eyes but no visible response. 3 dots appeared, pulsed, disappeared. Then, watching cameras now, stay invisible, You see anything else, you walk away. Understand? Daniel understood. He also understood that walking away wasn't something he was capable of doing. He repositioned his maintenance cart, creating a reason to work his way closer to the conference wing's main corridor. The hotel's layout was burned into his memory from 6 years of navigating its spaces. Every room, every camera angle, every line of sight. Through the glass partition separating the main lobby from the conference wing, Daniel could see Vale and Evelyn entering private room 3. The attorney's hand never left her back. Her posture remained rigid, controlled. As the door began to swing closed, Evelyn's eyes found Daniel one more time through the glass. The desperation in that look made his chest tighten. Then the door clicked shut, and they disappeared from view. Daniel checked his phone, 9:37 a.m. His hands wanted to shake. He forced them still. Think like Lily watches, he told himself quietly. See everything. React to nothing. The conference wing's corridor held 2 security cameras, one covering the main entrance, one covering the emergency exit. Private room 3 had internal cameras, but they could be disabled from inside the room if someone knew the access codes. Daniel had to assume Vale knew those codes, had to assume he'd planned for surveillance, which meant the only eyes that mattered right now were the ones Vale didn't know about, Daniel's. The service entrance to the conference wing required a staff keycard. Daniel swiped his, moving through with the unhurried purpose of someone who had legitimate business in the area. Maintenance workers belonged everywhere in hotels, fixing things, cleaning things, becoming part of the invisible infrastructure that kept luxury functioning. The corridor stretched ahead of him, plush carpet muffling footsteps, recessed lighting creating pools of warm illumination. Private room 3 was 12 feet ahead on the left. The door was solid mahogany, expensive and soundproof. But there was a ventilation grate near the ceiling, and ventilation grates carried sound. Daniel positioned his cart near a decorative planter, pulled out a stepladder, and climbed with the slow, methodical movements of someone checking ceiling fixtures. To anyone watching the security cameras, if anyone was watching, he was just maintenance doing maintenance work. At the top of the ladder, his ear found the ventilation grate, and he heard Evelyn Cross's voice tight with controlled fear. Whatever you think you're going to accomplish, Marcus, it won't work. The board knows I'm here. My assistant knows I'm meeting you. Vale's response was smooth, almost amused. Your assistant thinks you're having a private consultation about the merger terms. The board thinks you're in preliminary negotiations. And when you sign these documents in the next 10 minutes, everyone will think you made a brilliant strategic decision to sell Crosstech Industries to my clients at a very generous price. I will never sign. You will. Vale's voice hardened. Because the alternative is that your daughter receives a package containing evidence that her mother was involved in securities fraud. Fabricated evidence, of course, but detailed enough to destroy her legal career before it even starts. Princeton Law doesn't accept students whose mothers are under federal investigation, Evelyn. Silence. Daniel could hear Evelyn's breathing through the grate, quick and shallow. You wouldn't, she said finally. I already have the documents prepared. One signature from you transferring controlling interest to the Meridian Group, and I make sure that evidence never sees daylight. You'll retain a board seat, maintain your reputation, and your daughter graduates with honors. Everyone wins. Everyone except the 10,000 people who'll lose their jobs when Meridian dismantles Crosstech. Business is rarely sentimental, Evelyn. You, of all people, should understand that. Daniel's phone vibrated against his leg. He pulled it carefully from his pocket, keeping one ear to the grate. Miguel's message. Cameras show normal meeting, nothing visible. You sure about this? Of course the cameras showed nothing. Vale had planned this too carefully. Daniel's fingers moved across the screen. Audio confirms threat. He's coercing her to sign company transfer. Mentioned weapon earlier. The response came faster. We can't move on mentioned weapon. Need visible threat or clear distress. Daniel's jaw clenched. The law and security protocols required observable evidence before intervention. But by the time evidence became observable, Evelyn Cross might be signing away her life's work. Or worse. Through the grate, he heard paper rustling. Read it if you like, Vale said. All perfectly legal. Transfer of majority shares, effective immediately, in exchange for a very generous consulting fee. Your lawyers will find nothing actionable. Except the part where you're holding a gun to my spine. Vale laughed. Actually laughed. Am I? Because if security bursts in right now, they'll find me unarmed and you in the middle of a voluntary business transaction. They'll find your signature on these documents because you put it there. Who do you think they'll believe? Daniel closed his eyes. Vale wasn't just coercing Evelyn. He was creating a situation where any intervention would look like interference in a legitimate business deal. Smart, careful, professional, and very, very dangerous. You have 5 minutes, Vale continued. Sign, or I make the call that destroys your daughter's future. Your choice, Evelyn, but choose quickly. Daniel descended the ladder with the same unhurried movements he'd used to climb it. His mind was calculating, measuring, evaluating possibilities with the kind of tactical assessment he hadn't used in 8 years. Direct intervention was still out, too risky, and Vale had positioned himself perfectly to claim legitimacy. But there were other tools, other approaches. Daniel had spent 6 years learning every system in this hotel, every vulnerability, every pressure point. He pulled his phone and opened the Harrington's maintenance app, the system that controlled everything from temperature to lighting to door locks. His fingers moved across the interface, accessing the environmental controls for Private Room 3. First, he lowered the temperature 3 degrees. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to be uncomfortable over time. Enough to create physiological stress that would make Vale's concentration waver. Then he sent another message to Miguel. Need you to create reason to check conference room. Fire code violation. Anything. 5 minutes. The response, can't fabricate violations without cause. Daniel's response was immediate. Then I'm going in. Negative. Stand down. That's an order. But Miguel wasn't Daniel's supervisor, and Daniel had stopped following orders that prioritized protocol over lives the day Lily was born. He'd quit security work specifically because he'd learned that sometimes the rules designed to protect people actually got them killed. Through the ventilation grate, he heard Evelyn's voice. I need time to review. You need time to sign. 4 minutes now, Evelyn. I'm not a patient man. Daniel looked at his maintenance cart, at the tools of his invisible trade, and made a decision that would either save a life or cost him everything. He pulled the fire alarm. Not the main building alarm. That would cause panic and evacuation and exactly the kind of chaos that might make Vale desperate. Instead, he triggered the localized alert for the conference wing, the one that caused lights to flash, and a calm recorded voice to announce, Attention! A fire safety check has been initiated in this area. Please proceed calmly to the nearest exit while our team investigates. The voice was designed to sound routine, non-threatening, just enough to interrupt without causing panic. Through the grate, Daniel heard Vale curse softly. Then, We're not leaving. Keep signing. But Evelyn's voice held new steel. Fire code requires evacuation during safety checks. You're willing to add felony endangerment to your list of crimes? Daniel was already moving, positioning himself in the corridor with a fire extinguisher playing his role, concerned maintenance worker responding to the alert. When Private Room 3's door opened, he was standing there looking appropriately worried. Vale emerged first, his hand still on Evelyn's elbow. His eyes swept the corridor, landing on Daniel with the dismissive glance people give to servants. What's happening? Vale demanded. Daniel kept his voice neutral, apologetic. Fire safety check, sir. Automatic system trigger. I'm sure it's nothing, but protocol requires everyone to step into the main lobby while we verify. Shouldn't take more than a few minutes. We're in the middle of an important meeting. I understand, sir, but fire code is fire code. Insurance liability, you know. Daniel shrugged helplessly, just a working man following rules he didn't make. Vale's jaw tightened. For a moment, Daniel thought he might refuse, but refusing would draw attention, would create questions, would undermine the facade of normalcy Vale had worked so hard to construct. Fine, Vale bit out, but make it quick. They moved toward the lobby, and Daniel saw Miguel approaching from the opposite direction, 2 security officers flanking him. Miguel's eyes met Daniel's for a fraction of a second, a question and a warning in that look. In the main lobby, with witnesses and cameras and the impossible-to-control chaos of a public space, Vale's leverage began to crumble. His hand remained on Evelyn's elbow, but the pressure had shifted. Now it looked possessive rather than controlling. Now Evelyn could pull away if she chose. Ms. Cross, Miguel said smoothly, approaching with professional concern. We're conducting a routine safety check. If you'd like to wait in the executive lounge, we can have coffee sent up. That won't be necessary, Vale interrupted. We'll wait here. But Evelyn was looking at Miguel with new calculation in her eyes. Looking at the security officers, looking at Daniel, who stood quietly with his fire extinguisher, just another invisible maintenance worker. Her right hand moved subtly at her side, forming a single sign that only Daniel could read. Thank you. He didn't react, didn't acknowledge, just stood there being forgettable, while his heart hammered and his mind raced and every second stretched like hours. The grandfather clock showed 9:44 a.m. Somewhere in the building, actual fire safety inspectors were probably confused about why they'd been summoned. Miguel would have to explain, would have to justify the false alarm. Daniel would probably lose his job. But Evelyn Cross was alive and in a public space, and that was worth anything. The safety check is complete, Miguel announced after a carefully calculated 5-minute wait. False alarm. My apologies for the interruption. Vale's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then we can return to our meeting. Of course, Miguel gestured toward the conference wing, but he also positioned himself in a way that made it clear security would be maintaining heightened awareness. The message was subtle but unmistakable. We're watching now. Vale read that message. Daniel saw it in the fractional tightening of his jaw, the minute shift in his posture. The attorney was calculating new angles, reassessing his approach. Actually, Evelyn said clearly, I think I need some air before we continue. Marcus, why don't we resume this afternoon, say 2 o'clock? It wasn't a question, it was a power play, executed in front of witnesses, reclaiming control. Vale's hand dropped from her elbow. Of course, 2 o'clock. He walked away with unhurried confidence, but Daniel saw the tension in his shoulders, the controlled anger in his stride. This wasn't over. It was barely beginning. Miguel approached Daniel once Vale had disappeared. Fire alarm, he said quietly. Seemed like the right call. It was the wrong call. Also probably the only call that would have worked. Miguel's expression was carefully neutral. You're going to have paperwork, maybe a suspension. Worth it. Yeah. Miguel glanced toward where Evelyn stood, speaking quietly with her own phone now, presumably calling for her real security detail. Probably was. But Daniel? Next time you decide to play hero, give me more than a cryptic text, yeah? There won't be a next time. I just mop floors, remember? Miguel's slight smile acknowledged the lie they both knew that was. Then he walked away, leaving Daniel alone with his maintenance cart and racing thoughts. The clock showed 9:51 a.m. In 9 minutes, Daniel had disrupted an extortion plot, possibly saved a woman's life, and almost certainly complicated his own existence beyond measure. He picked up his mop and returned to work, becoming invisible again. But across the lobby, Evelyn Cross's eyes found him one more time, and the look she gave him was anything but dismissive. Daniel had spent 6 years learning to be unseen. In the space of 9 minutes, that careful invisibility had shattered. And as he pushed his cart toward the service elevators, he realized that Lily had been right all along, watching carefully, seeing what others missed, understanding the language of silence. These weren't just skills for surviving. Sometimes they were skills for saving lives. His phone vibrated. Unknown number. The message was brief. Executive Lounge, 20 minutes, come alone. EC. Daniel stared at the screen, then at his maintenance uniform, then at the reflection of himself in the polished marble floor. 20 minutes ago, he'd been invisible. Now he was summoned by one of the most powerful women in corporate America. He had no idea what came next, but he knew, with absolute certainty, that his carefully constructed life of invisibility was over. The question was, what would replace it? The executive lounge occupied the entire 26th floor of the Harrington Crown, a space where Manhattan's power brokers conducted business over single malt whiskey that cost more per glass than Daniel made in a day. He'd cleaned this room countless times, always after hours when the leather chairs sat empty and the panoramic windows reflected only his own ghost moving through the darkness. Walking through those doors during business hours, still wearing his maintenance uniform, felt like crossing into a country where he didn't speak the language. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly as he approached. Her professional smile flickered with uncertainty. Maintenance staff weren't supposed to be here. weren't supposed to exist in spaces designed for people who mattered. "I'm Daniel Reed," he said quietly. "Miss Cross is expecting me." The receptionist's uncertainty deepened, but she checked her tablet and found whatever confirmation she needed. "Of course. This way, please." She led him past clusters of executives conducting quiet negotiations, past windows that turned Manhattan into a toy city sprawling below, to a private alcove where Evelyn Cross sat alone with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while she stared at documents spread across the table. She looked up as Daniel approached, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that came from holding yourself together through terror and then having to keep functioning anyway. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice carrying the same command it had held in the lobby, but softened now with something that might have been vulnerability. "Please, sit." Daniel sat, acutely aware of how his gray uniform looked against the lounge's cream leather and polished wood. The receptionist retreated, leaving them in relative privacy, though Daniel could feel eyes tracking him from across the room. Maintenance workers didn't sit with CEOs, didn't occupy space in executive lounges, and the violation of that unwritten rule drew attention. Evelyn followed his gaze and seemed to understand. "Ignore them. Right now, you're the only person in this entire city I trust completely." She paused, studying him with the kind of intensity usually reserved for high-stakes negotiations. "You read sign language." It wasn't a question, but Daniel answered anyway. "My daughter is deaf. She's 8. And you saw me signing in the lobby." "Yes." "You understood that I was in danger." "Yes." "And instead of running for help, instead of alerting security in a way that would have gotten me killed, you created a distraction that gave me a public exit without revealing that you knew anything was wrong." Evelyn's hands weren't trembling anymore, but they gripped her coffee cup like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. "That wasn't luck. That was tactical thinking." Daniel said nothing. The less he revealed about his past, the simpler his present remained. But Evelyn had built a technology empire by reading what people didn't say. You have training, security work, maybe law enforcement, something that taught you how to assess threats and respond without escalating. "I did private security for a few years," Daniel admitted. "Before Lily was born. After her mother left, I needed steady hours, predictable schedule. Maintenance work gave me that." "So you went from protecting people to mopping floors." "I went from a job that paid well to a job that let me be a father. There's no shame in mopping floors, Ms. Cross. Honest work is honest work." Something shifted in Evelyn's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. "You're right, I apologize. That was thoughtless. That—" She set down her coffee cup. "What you did this morning saved my life. I need you to understand that. Marcus Vale had a gun pressed against my spine. He was going to force me to sign over controlling interest in my company, and if I'd refused, or if anyone had tried to intervene visibly, he would have killed me and claimed self-defense or accident or any number of things his lawyers could have made stick." "But you're safe now." "Am I?" Evelyn's laugh held no humor. "I've called my attorney, my security team, my board. I've initiated an investigation into Vale and everyone he's connected with. But Daniel, he threatened my daughter. He has fabricated evidence ready to deploy if I move against him. And the documents he wanted me to sign? They're legally sound. If he'd gotten my signature, even under duress, fighting it in court could take years." "What did security say?" "That they need more than my word." Vale covered his tracks perfectly. No weapon was found on him. The conference room cameras were disabled exactly as I suspected. Security footage from the lobby shows what looks like a normal business meeting. There's no proof. Daniel understood the problem immediately. Vale had constructed a scenario where Evelyn's testimony meant little without corroborating evidence. Her word against his, business deal versus coercion, and in corporate America, proving duress was nearly impossible when the documents looked legitimate. "He'll try again," Daniel said. "I know. That's why I asked you here." Evelyn pulled a leather folder from her briefcase, slid it across the table. "I want to hire you." Daniel stared at the folder without touching it. "Ms. Cross, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm a maintenance worker. Whatever problem you're facing requires professionals. You are a professional. You proved that this morning." Evelyn's intensity sharpened. I need someone I can trust absolutely, someone who isn't connected to my corporate infrastructure, someone Vale won't see coming because he's trained himself to look through people like you. I need someone who understands how to see danger before it becomes visible. I have a daughter who depends on me. I know, and that's exactly why this matters. Evelyn leaned forward. Vale threatened my child to control me. He'll do it again to someone else. Men like him see families as leverage, love as weakness. I'm offering you a position as my personal security consultant. The salary is in that folder. So is a signing bonus that would cover your daughter's education through college. Daniel's hands remained flat on the table, refusing to reach for the folder. I left security work for a reason. I'm not asking you to carry a gun or put yourself in danger. I'm asking you to do what you did this morning. Watch, assess, and help me see threats I'm too visible to notice. My regular security team is excellent at preventing physical attacks. But they didn't see Vale's approach because it looked like business. You did. Because I understand sign language. Because you pay attention to what people don't say. Evelyn's voice softened. I've spent 20 years building Crosstech. We employ 10,000 people. We develop technology that helps millions. If Vale succeeds in taking control, he'll gut the company for parts, sell our patents to the highest bidder, and those 10,000 employees will be unemployed by Christmas. I can't let that happen. But I also can't fight him effectively if I can't trust my own infrastructure. Daniel finally looked at the folder. The number written on the tab made his breath catch. More money than he'd make in 3 years of maintenance work. Enough to move Lily out of their cramped apartment, to get her the tutors she deserved, to stop counting pennies and start counting possibilities. I need to think about it, he said. Of course. But Daniel, think quickly. Vale gave me until 2 o'clock to resume our meeting. That's 4 hours from now. 4 hours to decide if I'm going to sign my company away or fight back. And if I fight, I need to know you're watching my back. She stood, gathered her documents, and paused before leaving. Your daughter, Lily, you said. Yes. She's lucky to have a father who sees the world through her eyes. That's a rare gift. Evelyn extended her hand. Thank you for this morning. Regardless of what you decide, you saved my life. I won't forget that. Daniel shook her hand, feeling the strength in her grip, the slight tremor she was working to control. Then she walked away, leaving him alone with the folder and a decision that felt too large for his small, carefully ordered life. He opened the folder. The salary figure was real. The signing bonus was real. The contract detailed responsibilities that sounded almost exactly like what he'd been doing anyway. Observe, assess, report potential security concerns, except now he'd be doing it for one specific person instead of an entire hotel. His phone buzzed, a text from Lily's school. Parent-teacher conference moved to tomorrow. Mrs. Chen wants to discuss Lily's reading progress. Hope that works? Daniel stared at the message. Tomorrow he'd sit in a too-small chair in Lily's classroom and hear about her achievements, her challenges, her bright future. He'd smile and nod and pretend he wasn't calculating whether he could afford the special books Mrs. Chen would inevitably suggest, the tutoring program that would help Lily excel, the field trip to the museum that required a fee he'd have to budget for. Or he could sign Evelyn Cross's contract and never worry about those calculations again. The phone rang. Miguel. You okay? His friend asked without preamble. Define okay. Fair point. Listen, the fire alarm thing is officially being written up as maintenance error. You'll get a warning in your file, but no suspension. The hotel knows something weird happened, but they're not pushing for details. That's good. It's weird is what it is. Corporate called, asked very specific questions about you, your background, your service record, your reliability. Miguel paused. What happened up there in the executive lounge? Job offer. From Evelyn Cross? Yeah. Miguel was quiet for a long moment. You gonna take it? I don't know. Daniel, I've known you 6 years. You're the most careful person I've ever met. You don't take risks. You don't draw attention. You built an entire life around being invisible. And this morning, you pulled a fire alarm to save a stranger. She's not a stranger anymore. No, I guess she's not. Miguel's voice held something complex, concern, maybe, or recognition. Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but that job you left 8 years ago, The one that paid better, that used your skills, that you walked away from to raise Lily? Maybe this is a chance to have both. Just think about it. After Miguel hung up, Daniel sat alone in the executive lounge, watching Manhattan sprawl beneath him, thinking about choices and consequences and the stories he told himself about who he was. He told himself he was a maintenance worker, just a father doing his best, someone who'd chosen invisibility over ambition, safety over uncertainty. But this morning, confronted with danger, he hadn't chosen invisibility. He'd chosen action. Maybe that said something about who he actually was beneath the careful construction. Daniel pulled out his phone and composed a text to Evelyn Cross. I need to pick up my daughter from school at 3. If the position includes flexible hours for parenting responsibilities, I'll take it. The response came within seconds. Absolutely. Family comes first. Always. Can you start tonight? I'm meeting with my board at 6, and I'd feel better knowing you were watching. Daniel's thumb hovered over the screen. Lily had after-school care until 6 on Thursdays, one of the rare days his schedule aligned with childcare availability. He could make this work, could test whether this new role fit before committing completely. I'll be there, he typed. He descended to the hotel's main level, returned to his maintenance cart, and finished his shift moving through familiar spaces with unfamiliar thoughts. His hands cleaned and organized and maintained, but his mind was elsewhere, already learning to see the Harrington crown through different eyes, not as an employee making everything pristine, but as a security consultant identifying vulnerabilities. The difference in perspective was startling. Suddenly he noticed the blind spots in camera coverage, the areas where someone could move unobserved, the patterns in staff rotation that created predictable gaps. The hotel he'd worked in for 6 years revealed itself as full of tactical possibilities he'd never consciously cataloged but had apparently absorbed anyway. At 2:45, he changed out of his maintenance uniform for the last time, storing it in his locker with something that felt like ceremony. Tomorrow he'd submit his resignation. Tonight, he'd become something new. Lily's school was a 15-minute subway ride, just enough time for doubt to creep in. What was he doing? He had a steady job, modest but reliable. Now he was throwing that away to work for a CEO who'd been threatened by her own attorney, stepping into corporate intrigue he barely understood, risking the stability Lily depended on. But then he remembered the desperation in Evelyn's signs, the controlled terror in her posture, and the calculation in Marcus Vale's smile. He remembered what it felt like to see danger and choose action, and he realized that invisibility had never really been safety. It had just been another form of hiding. Lily emerged from school with her usual careful observation of the world, her eyes tracking the movement of leaves in the wind, the pattern of other children's laughter, the way shadows fell across the playground. She saw Daniel waiting and her face lit up, hands already forming signs before she reached him. "Good day," he signed. "Mrs. Chen says I'm reading at 5th grade level," Lily signed back, pride making her gestures sharp and clear. "And I helped Marcus understand the math problem. He can hear, but sometimes he doesn't listen. I told him listening with eyes is just as important." Daniel's heart swelled. His daughter, teaching hearing children about observation and attention. "You're absolutely right. Eyes are for listening too." They rode the subway home, Lily pressed against his side, watching the other passengers with her characteristic intensity. She signed occasional observations. "That man is sad. See his shoulders?" And Daniel realized she was doing exactly what he'd done in the hotel lobby, reading the language of gesture and posture, seeing what others missed. Like father, like daughter. Both of them trained to watch the world carefully. At home, while Lily did homework, Daniel opened the contract Evelyn had given him and read it properly. The terms were generous almost to the point of disbelief. Flexible schedule, health insurance that actually covered things, education fund for dependents. But buried in the responsibilities section was a phrase that made him pause. May require assessment of sensitive corporate situations and personnel. In other words, corporate espionage, internal investigations, the kind of work that looked past what people said into what they actually meant. Daniel would be watching Evelyn's own employees, her board members, anyone who might pose a threat, looking for the Marcus Vales who hid behind legitimacy and contracts. It felt invasive. It also felt necessary. At 5:30, he left Lily with Mrs. Morrison next door, a retired teacher who charged reasonable rates for evening childcare and had learned basic sign language to communicate with Lily. Then he took the subway back to Manhattan, back to the Harrington Crown, back to a version of himself he'd thought he'd left behind. The board meeting was in the Harrington's largest conference room, the one usually reserved for corporate shareholders and high-stakes negotiations. Daniel arrived 40 minutes early, giving himself time to assess the space with professional eyes. Security was visible but not excessive. 2 guards at the entrance, cameras covering major angles. The room itself had been swept for recording devices, standard protocol for confidential business meetings. But Daniel noticed what the security sweep missed: the ventilation system that carried sound to adjacent spaces, the glass walls that could be read with laser microphones, the blind spot near the service entrance where someone could position themselves to observe without being observed. He positioned himself in that blind spot, wearing dark slacks and a simple button-down shirt that Evelyn's assistant had delivered to his apartment with a note. Professional but not corporate. You're a consultant, not a board member. The board arrived in clusters, men and women in expensive suits carrying leather portfolios and the confident air of people whose decisions affected millions. Daniel recognized some from news coverage: tech executives, venture capitalists, the kind of people who spoke at conferences and wrote op-eds and generally inhabited a world completely removed from maintenance workers and single fathers. Evelyn arrived last, flanked by her legitimate security team now, 2 professionals who moved with the kind of alertness Daniel recognized from his own training. Her eyes swept the room, landed on Daniel's position, and held for just a moment. Acknowledgement, gratitude, trust. Then she entered the conference room and became CEO again, command and confidence replacing the vulnerability she'd shown in the executive lounge. Through the glass walls, Daniel watched the meeting unfold. Body language told stories the words couldn't. A board member's defensive posture when questioned about financial projections. Another's too casual dismissal of concerns about the Meridian Group's acquisition interest. The subtle alliance forming between 3 executives on the left side of the table. 20 minutes into the meeting, Marcus Vail arrived. He walked through the security checkpoint with smooth confidence, nodding to guards who'd already verified his credentials, accepted without question because he was Evelyn's attorney, because his presence was expected, because people like him belonged in rooms like this. Daniel's entire body tensed. Vail entered the conference room, took a seat beside Evelyn with the casual familiarity of someone who'd attended hundreds of such meetings. He smiled, shook hands, contributed to the discussion with the kind of legal expertise that sounded authoritative and helpful. But Daniel saw what the board members missed: the way Vail's hand rested on the briefcase beside him, positioned for quick access. The way his eyes tracked Evelyn's movements with predatory focus. The micro-expression of satisfaction when one board member suggested that selling to the Meridian Group might be worth serious consideration. Vail was building consensus, creating internal pressure, turning Evelyn's own board into weapons against her. Daniel pulled out his phone and sent a text to Evelyn. Vail positioning for ally support. 3 board members showing receptive body language to acquisition discussion. Suggestion: call recess, separate conversations. He watched Evelyn's phone light up on the table. She glanced at it casually, as if checking the time, and read the message without breaking her stride in the current discussion. Then, smoothly, "Let's take a 15-minute break. I'd like to speak individually with some of you about concerns that have been raised." The board members stood, grateful for the interruption. Vail's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his careful orchestration disrupted. During the break, Evelyn pulled aside the 3 board members Daniel had identified, speaking with each privately, rebuilding personal connections that Vail had been trying to undermine. Daniel watched Vail watching her, saw the attorney's calculation shifting, adapting. This was psychological warfare conducted in conference rooms with coffee service and professional courtesy. And Vail was losing ground. When the meeting resumed, the dynamics had shifted. The board members who'd been receptive to acquisition talk now asked harder questions about the Meridian Group's actual intentions, their track record with other companies, the long-term implications for Crosstech's workforce. Vail contributed legal perspective, but his influence had diminished. Whatever he'd been building toward, Evelyn had disrupted it. The meeting concluded at 8:15 with no decisions made about the acquisition, which was itself a victory, Daniel understood. Vale had wanted momentum toward a sale. Evelyn had created delay and doubt. As the board members filed out, Vale approached Evelyn for a private word. Daniel couldn't hear the conversation, but he read Vale's posture, controlled anger, frustrated ambition, threat barely contained behind professional courtesy. Evelyn's response was cool, distant. Whatever hold Vale thought he had over her had loosened, and they both knew it. Vale left, and Daniel emerged from his observation position as Evelyn's security team did a final sweep of the room. "Well?" Evelyn asked when they were alone. "He's dangerous, but he's not stupid. He knows you've changed something. He'll adapt." "I know. That's why I need you to find out who he's working with. The Meridian Group is the obvious answer, but Vale's too smart to put all his leverage behind one client. There's something else. Someone else." Daniel nodded. This was the work now. Not just watching, but investigating. Not just seeing danger, but mapping its full extent. "I'll need access to corporate files, communication records, anything that might show Vale's connections." "You'll have it. My assistant will provide credentials tomorrow." Evelyn's exhaustion was visible again now that the performance of leadership had ended. "Thank you, Daniel, for this morning, for tonight, for seeing what my own board missed." "That's the job now, right?" "Right." She smiled slightly. "How does it feel, being visible again?" Daniel considered the question. 8 years of invisibility, of safety through obscurity, of choosing not to matter in order to protect what mattered most. And now, in one day, all of that careful construction dismantled. "Ask me again when I figure out if I made the right choice." "Fair enough." Evelyn gathered her things. "Go home to your daughter. Tomorrow we start mapping Vale's network." Daniel left the Harrington Crown and rode the subway back to his neighborhood, back to the apartment where Lily was probably already asleep, back to the life that now balanced on a knife's edge between what he'd been and what he was becoming. Mrs. Morrison met him at the door. "She's asleep, finished her homework, ate dinner, practiced her signs. That child is something special, Daniel." "I know." He paid Mrs. Morrison, thanked her, and moved quietly to Lily's room. She slept with one hand raised, fingers slightly curled, even in sleep, her hands ready to speak. Daniel stood in the doorway watching her, remembering every choice that had led to this moment, every sacrifice that had seemed so certain. He'd quit security work to be present for Lily, had taken a job that paid less but demanded less, that let him be invisible and safe and always available. But today he'd learned that invisibility was its own kind of absence, that safety sometimes meant watching danger happen without acting, that being always available meant never being fully alive. Tomorrow he'd return to the Harrington Crown not as maintenance but as something else. He'd investigate a corporate attorney who threatened CEOs with weapons and fabricated evidence. He'd map networks of power and corruption, and he'd do it all while being a father to a daughter who'd taught him that the most important communications happen in silence, that watching carefully was its own form of courage, and that sometimes being seen was the only way to truly matter. Daniel signed goodnight to Lily's sleeping form, even though she couldn't see it, and went to prepare for a future he'd stopped imagining years ago. The invisible man had become visible. Now he'd discover what that visibility would cost. The credentials arrived at 6 a.m, hand-delivered by a courier who looked mildly surprised to find Daniel's building in a neighborhood where luxury cars didn't typically venture. Inside the envelope, access badges, login information for Crosstech's internal systems, and a brief note in Evelyn's precise handwriting. Start with Vale's communication history. Look for patterns, not smoking guns. Daniel made breakfast for Lily, scrambled eggs and toast, her favorite, while she practiced spelling words in sign language, her small hands forming letters with increasing speed and confidence. She was getting faster, more fluent, and watching her, Daniel felt the familiar mixture of pride and grief that came with knowing her mother had never seen any of this, had walked away when the diagnosis came because she couldn't handle raising a child who would never hear her voice. "Daddy's distracted," Lily signed, tilting her head with that observational precision she'd inherited from him. Something changed. Daniel smiled, signing back. "New job, different work, same dad." "Good different or scary different?" The question was more perceptive than most 8-year-olds could manage. Daniel considered lying, offering reassurance that everything would be fine. But he'd always promised Lily honesty, had taught her that truth mattered even when it was uncomfortable. Both, he signed. Good because it uses skills I'm good at, scary because it's unfamiliar, but we'll figure it out together. Lily nodded seriously, then signed. Mrs. Chen says change is how we grow, like butterflies. Mrs. Chen is very smart. I know, that's why I listen with my eyes when she talks. Daniel walked Lily to school, taking the long route through the park where morning light filtered through autumn leaves and the city felt almost gentle. Other parents hurried past with coffee cups and phones, conducting business while shepherding children, existing in that perpetual state of divided attention that modern life demanded. But Daniel had learned from Lily that attention was a gift you gave fully or not at all. So he watched her point out a cardinal in the oak tree, saw her count the dogs being walked, noticed when she paused to study a homeless man sleeping on a bench with the kind of unself-conscious curiosity that adults had trained themselves to ignore. He's cold, she signed. His jacket is too thin. Daniel pulled off his own scarf, nothing expensive, but warm, and draped it over the sleeping man's shoulders. The man stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Lily smiled, satisfied that a small wrong had been partially corrected. You can't save everyone, you know, Daniel signed, even though the irony wasn't lost on him. But you can help the ones you see, Lily signed back. That's what you taught me. At the school gates, Lily hugged him tight, then ran to join her friends in their silent, animated conversations. Daniel watched until she disappeared inside, then turned toward the subway and the life that was pulling him in new directions. The Harrington Crown looked different in morning light, its Art Deco grandeur softened by the way sun caught the limestone facade. Daniel entered through the main lobby, no longer the service entrance, no longer invisible, and felt the strangeness of walking through spaces he'd only ever cleaned. Miguel caught him near the elevators. Heard you quit? Heard right. Also heard you're working for Evelyn Cross now. As what exactly? Security consultant. Miguel's eyebrows rose. That's a hell of an upgrade from mopping floors. Different work, same skills. Daniel echoed what he'd told Lily, recognizing the truth in it. Someone has to watch what the cameras miss. Just be careful. Corporate types play different games than hotel security. Bigger stakes, less visible rules. Miguel's expression held genuine concern. You need anything, you call me, yeah? Yeah. Thanks. Daniel rode the elevator to Crosstech's temporary Manhattan offices, the 15th floor, where Evelyn had established operations during her business trip. The space had the generic elegance of corporate rentals, glass walls, modern furniture, the faint hum of expensive technology managing information flows invisible to human eyes. Evelyn's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, who looked like she could organize chaos into submission, greeted Daniel with professional efficiency. Ms. Cross is on a call with Tokyo. She'll be another 20 minutes. In the meantime, I've set you up in the security office with access to everything you requested. The security office was smaller than Daniel expected, more closet than command center. 2 monitors, a secure terminal, and a door that locked from the inside. Patricia handed him a tablet loaded with files. Marcus Vale's complete communication history with Crosstech for the past 18 months, she said. Emails, call logs, meeting schedules, document exchanges. Ms. Cross has also flagged several board members she has concerns about. Their files are in the secondary folder. Daniel settled into the chair, fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was different from watching body language in real time, different from reading the immediate tells of threat and deception. This was archaeology, digging through digital sediment to find patterns that revealed intent. He started with Vale's emails, reading chronologically, watching language evolve. The early messages were standard legal communication, contract reviews, merger analyses, regulatory compliance, professional, thorough, exactly what a corporate attorney should produce. But around 6 months ago, the tone shifted. Subtle at first. Slightly warmer language when addressing certain board members, carefully phrased suggestions about exploring acquisition opportunities, mentions of the Meridian Group that increased in frequency. Daniel cross-referenced those mentions with Vale's meeting schedules and found lunches, coffee meetings, private consultations that weren't reflected in official Crosstech business. Vail was building relationships off the record, creating connections that wouldn't show up in formal corporate communications. Smart, careful, exactly what someone planning a hostile takeover would do. But it wasn't enough for evidence. Nothing Daniel found proved coercion or conspiracy, just a lawyer doing what lawyers did, networking and positioning and preparing strategies that might be entirely legitimate. Daniel shifted focus to the board members Evelyn had flagged. 3 names: Richard Pemberton, Chief Financial Officer; Susan Chen, Head of Operations; and James Wolcott, a venture capitalist who'd been with Crosstech since its early days. Pemberton's communications showed financial stress, mentions of personal investments gone wrong, carefully worded inquiries about accelerating stock options, emails to his accountant about tax strategies that suggested someone trying to cover unexpected losses. Financial vulnerability meant leverage. If Vail knew about Pemberton's problems, he could offer solutions in exchange for board support. Susan Chen's file was cleaner but showed something else: emails to headhunters, exploratory conversations about executive positions at other companies, language that suggested someone preparing an exit strategy. She wasn't invested in Crosstech's long-term future, which made her susceptible to arguments that selling to Meridian might be the smart move. James Wolcott was harder to read. His communications were sparse, professional, revealing little. But his calendar showed regular meetings with Vail, always in private locations, always without official agenda. The pattern suggested trust or conspiracy, or both. Daniel was deep in cross-referencing Wolcott's meeting patterns when Evelyn entered the security office. Find anything? Patterns, not proof. Daniel turned the monitor so she could see the timeline he'd constructed. Vail's been cultivating your board for months. Pemberton has financial problems that make him vulnerable. Chen is job hunting. Wolcott meets with Vail regularly, off record. Evelyn studied the timeline, her expression hardening. James, I'm not surprised about. We've had philosophical disagreements about the company's direction. But Richard and Susan... She trailed off, and Daniel saw the hurt beneath the professional exterior. These weren't just employees, they were people she'd trusted, worked with, probably considered friends. Vail's good at finding pressure points, Daniel said quietly. Financial stress, career ambition, ideological differences. He identifies what people want and positions himself as the person who can provide it. While positioning me as the obstacle to what they need, Evelyn's voice was bitter. Classic manipulation. It's more than manipulation, it's systematic. Daniel pulled up another screen showing Vail's communication network. Look at the frequency and distribution. He's not just influencing your board, he's isolating you from them, creating separate conversations where you're not present, building narratives about your leadership that you can't directly counter. So what do? We build counter-narratives. You start having individual conversations with each board member, not about business, but about their concerns. Pemberton's financial stress? Maybe Crosstech has an executive assistance program that could help. Chen's job hunting? Talk to her about her career goals, what she needs to feel valued. Wolcott's philosophical differences? Engage them directly instead of letting Vail mediate. Evelyn nodded slowly. Rebuild relationships Vail has been eroding. Exactly, but carefully. If Vail realizes you're onto his strategy, he'll accelerate his timeline. Daniel paused. Which brings me to the real question. What's his endgame? The Meridian Group wants to buy Crosstech, fine. But forcing you to sign at gunpoint? That's not normal corporate acquisition strategy. That's desperation or something else. I've been thinking about that too. Evelyn pulled up her own tablet, showed Daniel a financial analysis. The Meridian Group's offer is generous by market standards, but it's structured in a way that front-loads payment to me personally while giving them delayed majority control. By the time their ownership actually activates, I'd be legally bound and financially compensated enough that fighting back would be complicated. So they get the company and you get paid to stay quiet, essentially. But here's what bothers me. Meridian doesn't need Crosstech. They're a conglomerate with technology divisions that overlap with ours. Buying us makes them bigger, but not necessarily better. So why the aggressive push? Daniel studied the financial documents, looking for patterns his security background might illuminate that corporate analysis missed. What if they don't want your company? What if they want something specific inside it? Like what? I don't know. Patents, research, client data? Something valuable enough to justify this level of risk and complexity. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. We have 3 major development projects in final stages: quantum encryption algorithms, AI medical diagnostics, and advanced materials for renewable energy. Any of those would be worth billions if brought to market first. Could Vale know about them? He'd have limited access to development details, but as corporate attorney, he'd know they exist, know their general timelines. Evelyn was thinking out loud now, connecting pieces. If Meridian wanted to acquire one specific project without paying for the entire company, but that would require not just buying Crosstech, but knowing exactly which division to strip and sell before anyone realized what was happening. Which means they'd need internal intelligence, someone feeding them detailed information about your development projects. The implications hung between them, heavy with betrayal. Somewhere in Evelyn's organization, someone was selling secrets. And Vale was the facilitator, the connector, the man who turned private information into leverage. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from Lily's school. Lily fine, but small incident at recess. Can you call when available? His heart rate spiked immediately. The parents' instant terror that small incident was code for something worse. He looked at Evelyn. I need to make a call. Of course, use the office. I'll give you privacy. After Evelyn left, Daniel dialed the school with hands that wanted to shake. Mrs. Chen answered on the second ring. Daniel, don't worry. Lily's completely fine. There was a misunderstanding during recess. Another student accidentally bumped her, and Lily thought he'd done it intentionally. She pushed back, which isn't like her. The other child wasn't hurt, and Lily apologized, but I wanted you to know because it was unusual behavior. Daniel exhaled slowly. She's been stressed. Change in my work schedule, new routine. I should have anticipated this. Children are resilient, but they're also sensitive to adult stress. Is everything okay at home? Everything's fine, just a job transition. I'll talk to her tonight about managing feelings when things feel uncertain. After hanging up, Daniel sat in the quiet office thinking about how his choices rippled outward, affecting the one person he most wanted to protect. Lily was acting out because she sensed his stress, his divided attention, his movement into a world that felt dangerous and unfamiliar. Was this worth it? The money, the work, the return to skills he'd deliberately abandoned? His phone buzzed again. This time a photo from Patricia. Security camera footage showing Marcus Vale entering Crosstech's offices 40 minutes ago, heading toward the development wing where the quantum encryption project was housed. Daniel forwarded the image to Evelyn with a message. Vale here now, development wing, permission to follow? Her response was immediate. Careful. Don't confront, just observe. Daniel left the security office and moved through Crosstech spaces with the same invisible precision he'd perfected at the Harrington Crown. The development wing required badge access, but Daniel's new credentials opened every door. He slipped inside, staying back, watching. Vale stood outside Laboratory 3, speaking with a woman in a white coat whose badge identified her as Dr. Sarah Kim, lead researcher on the quantum encryption project. Their conversation was quiet, intimate in a way that suggested previous interactions. Daniel couldn't hear the words, but he read the body language. Dr. Kim's defensive posture, Vale's persuasive gestures, the way she kept glancing toward the lab door as if worried about being overheard. Then Vale handed her something, a small envelope, quickly pocketed. Payment, or promise of payment. Dr. Kim nodded, said something brief, and retreated into the lab. Vale walked away looking satisfied, passing within feet of Daniel's position without registering his presence, still invisible when it mattered. Daniel waited until Vale disappeared, then approached Laboratory 3. Through the window, he could see Dr. Kim at her workstation, the envelope open on her desk, her hands trembling as she read whatever was inside. He knocked softly. Dr. Kim looked up, startled, and quickly closed the envelope. Can I help you? Daniel showed his badge. Security consultant for Ms. Cross, just doing rounds, making sure everything's secure. Everything's fine here. Her voice was tight, controlled. Good to hear. Daniel let his gaze drift casually across the lab, taking in the setup. Sophisticated equipment, multiple workstations, whiteboards covered in equations he couldn't begin to understand. Must be exciting work, being this close to breakthrough technology. It has its moments. Dr. Sim. Kim's fingers drummed against her desk, nervous energy seeking outlet. I imagine a lot of people are interested in what you're developing here. Competitors, investors, people who'd pay well for early information. The fingers stilled. If you're suggesting, I'm not suggesting anything, just observing that protection works both ways, protecting the work from outside threats and protecting people from making choices they'll regret. Daniel's tone was gentle, non-accusatory. If someone's putting pressure on you, Dr. Kim, Ms. Cross should know. She's better equipped to help than you might think. Dr. Kim's professional composure cracked slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, but if that changes, you know where to find me. Daniel turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Whatever Vale promised you in that envelope, it's not worth what you'll lose. Trust me on that. He left before she could respond, before the confrontation could escalate into something that required official action. Sometimes the most effective intervention was planting doubt, creating space for someone to reconsider choices before they became irreversible. Daniel sent Evelyn a brief update. Vale meeting with Dr. Kim, possible intelligence leak. Recommend private conversation with her ASAP. Then he returned to the security office and continued mapping Vale's network, building the case piece by piece, pattern by pattern. Hours blurred together. Communications analysis, timeline construction, identifying connections that Vale had worked to keep hidden. Daniel worked with the focused intensity he'd once applied to security operations, the muscle memory of investigation returning like he'd never stopped. Patricia brought lunch around 1, looking impressed. Ms. Cross said you'd be thorough. She didn't mention you'd be relentless. Details matter. Clearly. Patricia set down a sandwich and coffee. For what it's worth, the staff likes you. Word got around about what you did yesterday, pulling the fire alarm to help Ms. Cross. People appreciate someone who sees problems and acts instead of just filing reports. After Patricia left, Daniel ate while reviewing his findings. The picture emerging was damning but incomplete. Vale had systematically positioned himself as the critical connection between Meridian Group and Crosstech, had cultivated board members, had likely compromised at least one researcher, and had structured everything to look legitimate until you examined the pattern as a whole. But pattern wasn't proof. Corporate espionage required evidence that would stand up in court, and nothing Daniel had found was quite enough. At 3, he left to pick up Lily from school, riding the subway with his mind still half occupied by timelines and communications networks. Lily emerged from the building walking slowly, her usual energy dampened. Mrs. Chen told you, she signed when she reached him. She did. Want to talk about it? Lily shrugged, then signed. I was wrong to push, but I was angry. Angry about what? Everything feeling different. You being distracted, not knowing if things are okay. Daniel knelt down to her level, taking her hands gently. Things are changing, but we're okay. I promise. The new job is complicated, and I'm still learning how to do it without bringing stress home. That's my mistake, not yours. But I should be better at handling changes. You're 8. You're allowed to have feelings about changes. You're allowed to be angry or scared or confused. What matters is what you do with those feelings. He paused. What would help you feel more secure right now? Lily considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. Knowing you're still my dad first, before everything else. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, the reminder that no job, no salary, no return to professional identity mattered more than this small person who trusted him absolutely. You're right, he signed, and I hear you. How about this? Every evening after work, we have 1 hour that's just us. No phones, no distractions, just you and me. Would that help? Lily nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Can we go to the park tomorrow? Watch the birds? Absolutely. They walked home together, stopping at the corner store where Daniel bought ingredients for Lily's favorite dinner, spaghetti with meatballs, simple and comforting. While Lily did homework, Daniel cooked, trying to quiet his mind's endless loop of investigation and analysis. But as he stirred sauce and formed meatballs, his phone buzzed with a message from Evelyn. Spoke with Dr. Kim. She confirmed Vale offered her money for research updates. Says she hasn't shared anything yet, but was considering it. She's agreed to cooperate with investigation in exchange for immunity. We have him. Daniel read the message twice, feeling the case solidify around Vale like concrete setting. Dr. Kim's testimony, combined with the communication patterns Daniel had mapped, would be enough. Not for criminal charges, perhaps, but for professional destruction, for exposing the conspiracy to Crosstech's board, for stopping whatever Meridian had planned. He typed back, "Good. What's next?" "Board meeting tomorrow, 2 p.m. I'm going to present everything. Vale will be there. He has to be, as corporate attorney. I want you there too, watching reactions, seeing who's surprised and who isn't." Daniel hesitated. Tomorrow afternoon was when he'd promised Lily the park, the birds, the undivided attention she'd asked for. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, torn between professional obligation and personal promise. Then he remembered Lily's signs. "Knowing you're still my dad first." "I can be there until 3, he typed. "After that, I have a commitment I can't break." Evelyn's response came quickly. "Understood. Meeting starts at 2, should be done by 3. Thank you, Daniel, for everything." That evening, Daniel and Lily ate spaghetti at their small kitchen table while she told him about the books Mrs. Chen was teaching them to read, about the science project she wanted to do about birds, about her friend Marcus, who was learning sign language because he thought it was cool. "Do you like your new job?" she signed eventually. Daniel considered the question honestly. "Parts of it. I'm good at seeing patterns, at understanding how people connect, but it's complicated in ways maintenance work wasn't." "Because you have to see bad things?" "Sometimes, but also because the work matters in bigger ways. The choices I make affect more than just me and you." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Chen says when you have more power, you have more responsibility, like superheroes." "I'm not a superhero, sweetheart. But you saved someone yesterday. That lady, the one you work for now. That's what superheroes do." Daniel smiled despite himself. "I guess when you put it that way, maybe a little bit. But I'm mostly just a dad who pays attention." "That's the best kind of superhero," Lily signed with complete certainty. Later, after Lily was asleep, Daniel returned to his laptop and continued building the case against Vale. He worked past midnight, constructing timelines and evidence chains, preparing materials that Evelyn could present to the board with maximum impact. The next morning came too quickly. Daniel got Lily ready for school, walked her through the park where birds were just beginning their morning chorus, and promised again that they'd return tomorrow afternoon to watch them properly. At Crosstech's offices, tension was palpable. Patricia moved with unusual urgency. Other staff spoke in hushed tones, and the conference room was being prepared like a battlefield, technology tested, documents arranged, chairs positioned with strategic precision. Evelyn found Daniel in the security office, reviewing final notes. She looked exhausted but determined, wearing the same expression he'd seen on soldiers before crucial operations. "Ready?" she asked. "Are you?" "I've spent 20 years building Crosstech. If I can't defend it now, then I don't deserve to lead it." She sat down across from him. "Thank you for doing this, for seeing what I couldn't see, for taking the risk when you could have just walked away." "Lily taught me that you help the ones you see," Daniel said. "I saw you. Couldn't walk away after that." "Your daughter sounds remarkable." "She is, which is why I have to leave at 3. I remember. Park, birds, undivided attention." Evelyn smiled slightly. "She's lucky to have you." The board members arrived in staggered intervals, each settling into the conference room with varying degrees of comfort. Pemberton looked nervous, Chen professionally distant, Wolcott coldly observant. Others Daniel hadn't identified as compromised took their seats with the casual confidence of people who believed this was just another meeting. Marcus Vale arrived last, impeccably dressed, carrying his leather briefcase with the same smooth confidence he'd displayed while holding a gun to Evelyn's back. He nodded to board members, exchanged quiet words with Wolcott, positioned himself as the helpful professional facilitating important business. Daniel watched from his corner position, tablet in hand, ostensibly taking notes but actually reading every micro-expression, every gesture, every tell that revealed who knew what was coming and who didn't. Evelyn called the meeting to order at precisely 2 p.m. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she began. "We have urgent matters to discuss regarding Crosstech's future and certain individuals who've attempted to compromise it." Vale's expression didn't change, but Daniel saw his shoulders tense fractionally. "Over the past several days," Evelyn continued, "I've become aware of a systematic effort to pressure me into selling Crosstech to the Meridian Group through coercion, manipulation, and corporate espionage." Now the room reacted. Surprise, confusion, carefully maintained neutrality depending on the board member. Evelyn presented the evidence methodically. Communication patterns showing Vale's cultivation of board members, financial records suggesting inappropriate payments, and finally Dr. Kim's testimony about being approached to sell research secrets. With each revelation, Vale's composure eroded slightly. Not enough for panic, but enough for Daniel to see the calculation behind his eyes, the attorney weighing options and preparing counterarguments. When Evelyn finished, silence filled the conference room like water rising. Then Vale smiled. "These are serious accusations, Evelyn," he said calmly, "based entirely on circumstantial patterns and the testimony of one researcher who, I should note, came to me asking for career advice and may have misinterpreted our conversations as something more sinister." "Career advice that involved cash payments?" Evelyn's voice was steel. "A personal loan, properly documented, to help with her father's medical expenses. Nothing improper." Vale opened his briefcase, produced documents. "I have the loan agreement right here. Legal, transparent, completely unrelated to her research work." Daniel watched the board members' reactions. Some looked skeptical, others uncertain. Vale was doing what he did best, creating reasonable doubt, positioning illegal activity as legitimate business, making accusers look paranoid. But Daniel had seen something else. When Vale opened his briefcase to retrieve the loan documents, Daniel glimpsed another envelope inside, similar to the one he'd handed Dr. Kim, but thicker. "Ms. Cross," Vale continued, "I understand you're under stress. The Meridian offer has created pressure, and yesterday's unfortunate misunderstanding in the lobby clearly shook you. But making accusations against your own attorney based on email patterns and misunderstood conversations isn't the way forward." "Misunderstanding?" Evelyn's voice shook slightly. Not with fear now, but with rage. "You held a gun to my back. I've never owned a weapon in my life. Security can verify that I passed through screening yesterday unarmed." Vale looked around the table, his expression sympathetic. "Evelyn, perhaps you need rest. This level of paranoia isn't healthy." He was brilliant, Daniel had to admit, turning the victim into someone whose judgment couldn't be trusted, whose accusations stemmed from stress and imagination rather than reality. The clock showed 2:45. 15 minutes before Daniel had to leave, before he had to choose between staying to see this through or keeping his promise to Lily. Then James Wolcott spoke. "Marcus, if you're so confident in your innocence, you won't mind if we conduct an independent investigation into your communications and financial dealings with board members." Vale's smile tightened. "Of course not. I welcome transparency." "Good." Wolcott turned to Evelyn. "I move that we suspend all discussions of the Meridian acquisition pending a full investigation, and that Marcus Vale be placed on administrative leave until that investigation concludes." The motion carried with surprising speed. Even Pemberton and Chen voted yes, perhaps seeing which way power was shifting, perhaps genuine in their concern. Vale stood slowly, gathering his briefcase. "This is a mistake, but I'll comply, of course. I look forward to being vindicated." He walked out with his dignity intact, but Daniel saw the fury beneath the professional facade. This wasn't over. Vale would regroup, would find new angles, would return with lawyers and documentation that made everything look legitimate. But for now, Evelyn had won. The acquisition was suspended, the board was alerted, and the conspiracy had light shining on it. The meeting concluded at 2:55. Daniel caught Evelyn's eye, pointed to his watch. She nodded, understanding. He left Crosstech's offices and rushed to meet Lily at school, arriving slightly breathless but exactly on time. She ran to him, hands already signing. "Park now?" "Park now," he confirmed. They walked together through afternoon sunshine to the small park where birds gathered near the pond. Lily settled on their favorite bench, pulled out the notebook where she kept her bird observations, and began watching with that perfect attention she'd mastered. Daniel sat beside her, deliberately putting his phone on silent, deliberately choosing this moment over any corporate crisis that might be unfolding in Manhattan offices. After a while, Lily signed, "Did your superhero work go okay today?" "It went okay. We stopped someone from doing something bad." "Good." She returned her attention to a cardinal pecking at seeds. "Now you're here doing dad work." "Now I'm here doing dad work," Daniel agreed. And for one perfect hour, he was just a father watching birds with his daughter, the most important job he'd ever had. The peace lasted exactly 18 hours. Daniel was making breakfast the next morning when his phone erupted with messages. The first was from Patricia. "Emergency. Need you at office immediately." The second from Evelyn herself. "Vale's making his move. Come now." Daniel looked at Lily, who was eating cereal and practicing her vocabulary signs between bites. School didn't start for another hour. Mrs. Morrison wouldn't be available until 8. "I have to go to work early," he signed. "Can you get ready extra fast? I'll drop you at school early. They have morning care." Lily's face fell slightly. She hated the chaotic energy of early morning care, preferred the quieter routine of arriving exactly on time. But she nodded, reading the urgency in his posture. They rushed through the morning routine, Daniel's mind racing through possibilities. What move could Vale make so quickly? He'd been suspended, his credibility damaged. Any counterattack should take days to organize, not hours, unless he'd been preparing for exactly this scenario all along. Daniel dropped Lily at school with a quick hug and a promise to pick her up on time, then caught the subway to Manhattan. His phone continued buzzing with updates. Patricia sending photos of news headlines, Miguel forwarding security alerts, and finally a voice message from Evelyn that made his blood run cold. "Daniel, Vale filed a lawsuit against me personally and Crosstech early this morning. Defamation, wrongful termination, breach of fiduciary duty, but that's not the real problem. He's also filed an emergency injunction claiming I'm mentally unfit to lead the company and requesting the board appoint interim leadership. The hearing is at 10 a.m. He's trying to remove me completely." Daniel checked the time, 7:45. 2 hours and 15 minutes to understand Vale's strategy and find a counter. At Crosstech's offices, the atmosphere was pure crisis. Staff moved with frantic purpose. Phones rang constantly. And in the conference room, Evelyn sat surrounded by lawyers reviewing documents with the desperate intensity of people searching for exits in a burning building. She looked up when Daniel entered, and he saw something he hadn't seen before. Fear not for her safety, but for her life's work. "He's claiming yesterday's accusations constitute a psychotic break," she said without preamble. "Says my stress and paranoia have made me dangerous to the company. He has 3 psychiatric experts ready to testify that my behavior fits a pattern of executive burnout and delusional thinking." "Based on what evidence?" "Based on me accusing my trusted attorney of holding me at gunpoint when security found no weapon. Based on me claiming conspiracy when his communications appear professionally normal to anyone not trained to see patterns. Based on me suspending him without what a judge might consider adequate cause." Evelyn's voice cracked slightly. "He's turning my attempt to expose him into proof that I'm unstable." One of the lawyers, a severe woman named Barbara Chen, interjected, "The injunction hearing is preliminary, but if the judge grants it, Evelyn loses control of Crosstech immediately pending full psychiatric evaluation. That evaluation could take weeks, during which time an interim CEO appointed by the board, likely someone Vale has already positioned, would have authority to approve the Meridian acquisition." Daniel understood the brilliance and brutality of it. Vale had constructed a scenario where Evelyn's legitimate concerns about conspiracy looked like mental illness, where her attempt to protect her company became evidence she was unfit to run it. And he'd done it with legal precision that would be almost impossible to counter in the 2 hours before the hearing. "What about Dr. Kim's testimony?" Daniel asked. She confirmed Vale approached her about selling research. "Vale's lawyers characterize that as a misunderstanding," Barbara said. "They have the loan documentation, character witnesses saying Vale regularly helps employees with personal problems, and Dr. Kim's own earlier performance reviews showing she's been under stress about her father's medical bills. They're painting it as Evelyn exploiting a vulnerable employee's confusion to support her paranoid accusations. So we have nothing. We have patterns, timeline analysis, and communication records that suggest inappropriate behavior, but nothing that would convince a judge in 2 hours that Evelyn is competent and Vale is the dangerous one. Barbara's expression was grim. I'm sorry, Evelyn. This is an expertly constructed trap. Daniel walked to the windows overlooking Manhattan, thinking through the problem with the tactical assessment he'd learned in security work. Vale had the advantage of preparation, legal expertise, and a narrative that fit existing biases about stressed executives breaking under pressure. Evelyn had the truth, but truth without proof was just another story competing for belief. What if we don't fight the narrative? Daniel said slowly, idea forming as he spoke. What if we prove it instead? Everyone turned to look at him. Vale's entire strategy depends on Evelyn appearing unstable and him appearing trustworthy, Daniel continued. But what if we could show the judge exactly what Vale is, not through evidence that can be reinterpreted, but through his own behavior in real time? Evelyn stood. What are you thinking? You said the hearing is at 10. That gives us just over 2 hours. What if in that time we create a situation where Vale reveals himself, where he thinks he's won and gets careless? Barbara shook her head. That's incredibly risky. If it doesn't work, we've wasted time we could have spent building a legal defense. Do we have a legal defense? Daniel asked bluntly. The silence that followed was answer enough. Tell me your idea, Evelyn said. Daniel outlined the plan quickly, watching their faces shift from skepticism to cautious possibility. It was dangerous, relied on Vale behaving exactly as Daniel predicted, and could backfire spectacularly. But it was also the only approach that might work in the time they had. I'll need access to Vale's current location, his communications, and complete cooperation from Dr. Kim, Daniel finished. And Evelyn, you'll need to make a phone call that sells the performance perfectly. I can do that. Evelyn's fear was transforming into something harder, sharper. Barbara, get Dr. Kim here. Patricia, find out where Vale is right now. The lawyers scattered to execute their parts of the plan while Daniel pulled out his tablet and began mapping the logistics. This was the work he'd done in his previous life, creating scenarios, predicting behavior, positioning pieces so that when the moment came, everything aligned. Patricia returned first. Vale's at the Harrington Crown. He checked into a suite last night, probably to be close to the courthouse for the hearing. Of course he was. The hotel where everything started, where Vale had made his first move. There was a poetic symmetry to it that Vale probably appreciated. Daniel called Miguel. I need a favor, big one. Name it. Can you tell me which suite Marcus Vale is staying in and give me access to the service corridors on that floor? Miguel was quiet for a moment. This related to what happened with Ms. Cross? Directly. Then, yeah, I can make that happen. But Daniel, if you're planning what I think you're planning, be careful. Hotel security can only look the other way so far. I'm not going to do anything illegal. Just watch and listen. Famous last words, Miguel said, but he sent the suite number and access codes anyway. Dr. Kim arrived looking terrified, flanked by one of Barbara's associates. She was young, maybe 30, with the kind of earnest dedication that made her vulnerable to people like Vale, who could identify idealism and weaponize it. Dr. Kim, I need you to make a phone call, Daniel said, to Marcus Vale. You're going to tell him you're panicking about your testimony yesterday, that you think you made a mistake and want to recant. But I didn't make a mistake. He really did. I know, but Vale doesn't know that you know that. Daniel kept his voice gentle. Right now he thinks he's won. He thinks his lawsuit and injunction have Evelyn trapped. If you call sounding scared and conflicted, he'll believe you're just another piece falling into place. And he'll say things to reassure you, to keep you controlled, things we can use. You want me to record the call? I want you to give us evidence of who he really is. Dr. Kim's hands trembled slightly, but she nodded. Okay, what do I say? They scripted it carefully, enough panic to sound genuine, enough detail to make Vale think she was actually breaking. Then Dr. Kim made the call on speaker, her voice shaking with what might have been real fear or might have been extraordinary acting. Mr. Vale, It's Sarah Kim. I'm sorry to bother you, but I need to talk about yesterday. Vale's voice came through warm, concerned. Sarah, of course, are you all right? You sound distressed. I think I made a terrible mistake. Ms. Cross put so much pressure on me about our conversation, and I got confused. I don't think you were actually offering money for research. I think it was just the loan, like you said, and I misunderstood. Oh, Sarah. Vale's sympathy sounded perfectly genuine. I was worried about this. Ms. Cross has been under tremendous stress, and unfortunately, she's directing that stress at people around her. But you did nothing wrong. You told the truth as you understood it. But now there's this lawsuit and the hearing, and I'm worried I damaged your reputation for no reason. You didn't damage anything. The truth will come out, I promise. In fact, I'm quite confident that by this afternoon, everything will be resolved and Ms. Cross will be getting the help she clearly needs. There it was, the confirmation that Vale expected to win, expected Evelyn to be removed, expected his plan to succeed. I could recant my testimony, Dr. Kim offered, voice small. Tell the board I was mistaken. That's very thoughtful, Sarah, but not necessary. What would help is if you could provide a statement about the pressure Ms. Cross put on you to make those accusations. Just the facts. How she called you in, how she framed the questions, how she made it clear what answers she wanted. That kind of testimony about her state of mind would be very valuable. Daniel watched Evelyn's face harden as she heard Vale coaching Dr. Kim to provide evidence supporting his narrative of instability. I could do that, Dr. Kim said hesitantly, if you think it would help. It would help tremendously. Why don't you come to my suite at the Harrington? We can draft something together before the hearing. Say 9 o'clock? Okay, thank you, Mr. Vale. Thank you, Sarah. You're doing the right thing. After the call ended, Dr. Kim looked shaken. He's so convincing. If I didn't know better, I'd believe I actually misunderstood everything. That's his skill, Evelyn said quietly. Making lies sound like truth, and truth sound like confusion. Daniel checked the time, 8:30. 30 minutes before Dr. Kim was supposed to meet Vale, 90 minutes before the hearing. Everything had to happen fast now. Evelyn, you need to make your call, he said. Sell it perfectly. Evelyn took a breath, composed herself, and dialed Vale's number. When he answered, she let her voice break just slightly, let exhaustion and defeat color every word. Marcus, it's Evelyn. I need to talk about the hearing. Evelyn. Vale's voice shifted, became more guarded. My lawyers have advised me not to speak with you directly. I know, but Marcus, please, I'm not calling to argue or accuse. I'm calling to concede. She let the word hang. You were right. I've been under too much stress. Yesterday I made accusations I can't prove, damaged your reputation based on paranoia and exhaustion. I'm calling to ask if there's a way to resolve this without the hearing. Silence on the other end. Daniel could imagine Vale calculating, assessing whether this was genuine or trap. What are you proposing? Vale asked carefully. I'll agree to a voluntary psychiatric evaluation. I'll recommend you be reinstated as corporate attorney, and I'll seriously consider the Meridian acquisition with the understanding that my judgment has been compromised and I need the board's guidance. Evelyn's voice was masterfully broken, proud woman finally admitting defeat. In exchange, you drop the lawsuit and the injunction. Let me retain some dignity while I get help. More silence. Then, Evelyn, I appreciate this. I know how difficult it must be to make this call, but I need to be honest with you. My lawyers have advised that we proceed with the hearing, not to punish you, but because the board needs formal documentation that changes in leadership are legally justified. So there's nothing I can do. What you can do is not fight it. Accept the evaluation gracefully, work with the interim CEO, and focus on your health. If you do that, I'll make sure the lawsuit is dropped and your reputation remains intact. You'll still have a position at Crosstech, just not the daily operational stress that's clearly been too much. And the Meridian acquisition? That will proceed as planned. It's the right move for the company, Evelyn. You'll see that once you're thinking more clearly. Evelyn closed her eyes, let defeat saturate her voice completely. All right, I won't fight the injunction. Thank you for being kind about this, Marcus. Of course. We're colleagues, Evelyn. I want what's best for you and the company. Get some rest before the hearing. Let the process happen." After hanging up, Evelyn looked at Daniel. "He bought it?" "Completely. Now he thinks you're broken, and Dr. Kim is about to provide testimony supporting his narrative. He's confident, which means he'll be careless." "So what happens at 9 when Dr. Kim doesn't show up to his suite?" "She does show up," Daniel said, "but not alone. The plan was simple in concept, complex in execution. Dr. Kim would go to Vale's suite wearing a recording device, would let him coach her on testimony, and would give Daniel audio evidence of Vale actively manipulating a witness. Meanwhile, Daniel would be in the service corridor with access to the suite's exterior ventilation system, recording visual confirmation through the vent camera Miguel had reluctantly agreed to position. "This is barely legal," Barbara warned. "Recording someone without consent, even in a hotel room. It's a public accommodation space, not a private residence," Daniel countered. "And Dr. Kim is consenting to record her side of the conversation. If Vale says something incriminating, that's his choice. If the judge even allows this as evidence, then we have nothing to lose by trying." At 8:55, Dr. Kim entered the Harrington Crown's lobby wearing a device so small it looked like a decorative button on her jacket. Daniel was already in position in the service corridor, tablet connected to Miguel's camera system, watching the feed from the camera positioned to capture Vale's suite through the vent. His phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Have a good day at work, Daddy. You're doing superhero stuff, right?" Daniel smiled despite the tension. "Always thinking of you," he typed back. "See you at 3. Dr. Kim knocked on Vale's door at exactly 9 a.m. Through the camera feed, Daniel watched Vale open the door, all warmth and professional concern. "Sarah, come in. Thank you for doing this. I know it must be difficult." The suite was elegant, sitting area, desk, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Vale guided Dr. Kim to the couch, sat across from her in a chair positioned to seem non-threatening. "I've drafted a preliminary statement," Vale said, pulling out his tablet. "Just the basic facts about your interactions with Ms. Cross. I want you to read it and tell me if anything feels inaccurate." Through the audio feed from Dr. Kim's device, Daniel heard her take the tablet, heard the pause as she read. "This makes it sound like she coerced me," Dr. Kim said quietly. "Did she not? Sarah, be honest. When Ms. Cross called you into her office and asked about our conversations, did you feel free to tell her the truth, or did you feel pressured to say what she wanted to hear?" "I felt pressured. But Mr. Vale, that's because what you did was wrong. The money you offered, the loan I offered for your father's medical care, a loan you came to me requesting, that I provided out of concern for a colleague. That's not what happened." Vale's expression shifted, warmth draining away. "Sarah, listen carefully. You're young, early in your career. You have extraordinary potential, but you're also in a very precarious position right now." Daniel watched through the camera as Vale stood, moved to the windows, his body language changing from sympathetic to controlling. "Ms. Cross made accusations yesterday that damaged my reputation," Vale continued. "Your testimony supported those accusations. Now Ms. Cross is going to be removed from leadership. That's inevitable. The question is whether you survive her fall or get pulled down with her. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. The new interim CEO will need to make difficult decisions about personnel. Researchers who demonstrated poor judgment, who allowed themselves to be manipulated into making false accusations, who showed they can't be trusted with sensitive information, those researchers don't last long." Dr. Kim's voice was shaking now. "So I either sign this statement saying Evelyn pressured me, or I lose my job. I'm saying that making the right choice now could save your career. You made a mistake yesterday. This statement corrects that mistake. It's simple." Through the camera, Daniel watched Dr. Kim stand, saw her hands clench. "And if I refuse?" Vale smiled, and it was the coldest expression Daniel had ever seen. "Then I make a phone call to the Meridian Group's head of research and tell them that Crosstech has a young researcher working on quantum encryption who's brilliant but financially desperate. Her father needs expensive care. She's vulnerable to offers. They'll offer her double her current salary to bring her research with her when she jumps ship. And then I'll make sure Crosstech's legal team knows she was planning to steal proprietary research all along." That's insane. I would never eat. But the evidence would suggest otherwise. The loan I gave you? That becomes a pattern of you seeking money from various sources. The research updates you promised me? Those become proof you were willing to sell secrets. By the time the legal case concludes, your reputation would be destroyed and you'd be facing criminal charges. Daniel's hands tightened on the tablet. This was it. Vale revealing exactly who he was, confident enough in his control to make explicit threats. So those are your options, Sarah. Sign the statement supporting my version of events and keep your career intact, or refuse and watch me destroy everything you've built. Vale's voice was casual now, discussing her professional annihilation like a routine business decision. What's it going to be? The silence stretched. Through the audio feed, Daniel could hear Dr. Kim breathing quickly, panicking. Then she did something perfect. I need to use the bathroom, she said, to think. Of course. Take your time. Daniel watched Dr. Kim disappear into the suite's bathroom. Immediately, he sent her a text. You did perfectly. We have everything we need. When you come out, tell him you'll sign, then leave. We'll handle the rest. A moment later, his phone buzzed with her response. Okay, but I'm terrified. You're brave, almost done. Dr. Kim emerged from the bathroom looking pale, but composed. I'll sign the statement. Vale's smile returned, warm and congratulatory. Smart choice, Sarah. You won't regret this. Your career is going to flourish, I promise. She signed the tablet he offered, then left quickly. Daniel waited until she was clear of the suite, then sent the recording files to Barbara with a message. Vale on record threatening a witness and admitting to fabricating evidence. This enough? Barbara's response was immediate. More than enough. Get to the courthouse. We're filing this as emergency evidence. Daniel left the Harrington Crown and caught a cab to the courthouse, arriving at 9:45. The hearing was scheduled for 10 in courtroom 7B, and the hallway outside was already filling with lawyers, journalists who'd caught wind of the case, and curious observers drawn to the spectacle of a CEO being declared unfit. Evelyn stood with her legal team, looking every inch the composed executive despite everything. When she saw Daniel, relief flashed across her face. We have it, he said quietly. Vale threatening Dr. Kim, admitting he plans to fabricate evidence, laying out exactly how he's been manipulating everything. The judge will allow it? Barbara thinks so. It's legitimate evidence of witness tampering happening in real time during active litigation. If nothing else, it proves you weren't paranoid. There actually is a conspiracy. At 9:55, they filed into the courtroom. Vale was already there with his attorneys, confident and professional. He nodded to Evelyn with what appeared to be genuine concern, playing his role perfectly for the judge. Judge Patricia Morrison took the bench at exactly 10 a.m. She was in her 60s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that came from decades of seeing through legal manipulation. We're here on an emergency motion for injunctive relief, she began. Mr. Vale's attorneys claim that Ms. Cross is mentally unfit to continue as CEO of Crosstech Industries and request the appointment of interim leadership. Ms. Cross's attorneys oppose this motion. I've reviewed the preliminary filings. Mr. Harrison, you may begin. Vale's lead attorney stood, began presenting the narrative they'd constructed. Evelyn's stress, her paranoid accusations, her suspension of Vale without adequate cause, her erratic behavior suggesting mental breakdown. It was persuasive. Daniel could see the judge listening carefully, making notes. Then Barbara stood. Your Honor, we have evidence obtained this morning that directly contradicts the petitioner's characterization of events. We request permission to present audio and video recordings of Mr. Vale threatening and attempting to coerce a witness into providing false testimony. The courtroom erupted. Vale's attorneys objected loudly, arguing about recording consent and evidence admissibility. Vale himself remained perfectly still, but Daniel saw the calculation behind his eyes. Judge Morrison called for order. Ms. Chen, approach the bench. Mr. Harrison, you as well. The sidebar conference lasted 5 tense minutes. Daniel watched Vale conferring with his attorneys, saw the moment they realized their carefully constructed narrative was collapsing. When the lawyers returned to their tables, Judge Morrison spoke clearly. I'm going to allow the evidence. Mr. Harrison, you'll have opportunity to challenge its admissibility in any subsequent proceedings, but for the purposes of this emergency hearing, I want to hear it. Miss Chen, proceed. Barbara played the audio first, Vale's voice crystal clear as he threatened Dr. Kim, outlined his plan to fabricate evidence, admitted to manipulating the situation. The courtroom was silent except for Vale's recorded words hanging in the air like indictments. Then the video, showing Vale's body language shift from sympathetic to predatory, showing the cold calculation as he laid out Dr. Kim's options. When it finished, Judge Morrison looked at Vale with an expression that could have frozen fire. Mr. Vale, do you wish to respond to this evidence? Vale stood slowly. His attorneys were whispering urgently, but he waved them off. Your Honor, that recording was obtained illegally and taken out of context. The recording was obtained by a consenting participant in the conversation you initiated, Judge Morrison interrupted. And I heard plenty of context. You threatened a witness, admitted to planning fabricated evidence, and explicitly described coercing someone into false testimony. That's not stress or misunderstanding, Mr. Vale. That's criminal witness tampering. Your Honor, if I could explain, you'll have opportunity to explain to the district attorney's office, which I'm referring this matter to immediately. As for your motion regarding Ms. Cross's competence, it's denied. Not only denied, I'm finding that the motion itself was made in bad faith as part of what appears to be a broader conspiracy to illegally seize control of Crosstech Industries. Vale's composure finally cracked. This is a persecution, Your Honor. I'm being railroaded. You're being held accountable. There's a difference. Judge Morrison turned to Evelyn. Ms. Cross, you have my apologies. This court will not be used as an instrument of corporate theft. Your authority as CEO is confirmed, and I'm issuing a protective order preventing Mr. Vale from any contact with you or Crosstech employees pending investigation. She slammed the gavel, and it was over. In the hallway afterward, Evelyn leaned against the wall, looking like someone who'd survived a car crash, shaken but alive. Her legal team was already discussing next steps, criminal charges, civil suits, damage control. But Evelyn just looked at Daniel. You saved me. Again. Dr. Kim saved herself, Daniel said. I just gave her the opportunity. Don't diminish what you did. You saw what Vale was, predicted how he'd behave, and created a scenario where he revealed himself completely. She straightened, executive composure returning. I meant what I said in the contract, Daniel. You have a place at Crosstech for as long as you want it. Daniel checked his phone. 12:15. Lily's school let out at 3. He had almost 3 hours to help with cleanup, to give statements to investigators, to begin the process of dismantling everything Vale had built. But he also had a promise to keep. I appreciate that, he told Evelyn, but right now I need to figure out what kind of place that is. Because I can't do this job if it means breaking promises to my daughter. And I can't be the father she deserves if I'm constantly pulled into corporate warfare. Evelyn nodded slowly. Then let's figure it out together. But Daniel, whatever you decide, thank you. You gave me back my company and possibly saved 10,000 people's jobs. That matters. It did matter. Daniel felt the weight of it, the significance of choices that rippled beyond his small life into thousands of others. But as he left the courthouse and headed toward the subway, he also felt the pull of that other life, the one where birdwatching in parks mattered more than corporate intrigue, where his daughter's homework was more important than witness testimony, where being invisible meant being present for the one person who truly saw him. The question was whether he could have both, or whether choosing one meant losing the other. Daniel picked up Lily at exactly 3 o'clock, watching her emerge from school with her usual careful observation of the world around her. She saw him waiting, and her face lit up with that pure joy that reminded him why every choice he'd made had been worth it. Good day, he signed as she reached him. We learned about metamorphosis, she signed back, hands moving with excitement. How caterpillars become butterflies. Mrs. Chen says it's like when people change into better versions of themselves. Daniel smiled at the timing, at how children's lessons so often mirrored adult experiences. Mrs. Chen is very wise. They walked to the park as promised, settling on their favorite bench near the pond. Lily pulled out her notebook and began cataloging birds with meticulous attention, while Daniel sat beside her thinking about metamorphosis and transformation and whether change always meant becoming something better or just something different. His phone buzzed with messages he ignored, updates from Patricia about media inquiries, Texts from Barbara about upcoming depositions, emails from board members wanting to discuss Vale's conspiracy. All of it could wait. Right now, the most important thing in his world was an 8-year-old girl counting sparrows. After an hour, Lily set down her notebook and signed, "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you happy with your new job?" The question was more complicated than she probably realized. Daniel thought about the past few days, the adrenaline of investigation, the satisfaction of solving puzzles, the weight of knowing his actions affected thousands of lives. Then he thought about the stress that had made Lily push another student, the early morning emergencies that disrupted their routine, the constant pull between professional obligation and personal promise. "Parts of it make me happy," he signed honestly. "Using my skills, helping people, feeling like the work matters. But other parts are hard. The stress, the unpredictable hours, being pulled away from you. So you might stop? I'm thinking about what version of the job would let me be good at the work and good at being your dad, because both matter to me." Lily nodded seriously, then signed something that hit Daniel with unexpected force. "Mrs. Chen says the best jobs are the ones that make you feel like yourself. Do you feel like yourself doing this work?" Daniel considered the question. For 8 years, he'd told himself that being a maintenance worker was enough, that invisibility was safety, that modest ambitions meant fewer risks. He'd convinced himself he was content mopping floors and staying unnoticed. But these past days had shown him something different. When he'd seen Evelyn's desperate sign for help, when he'd mapped Vale's conspiracy, when he'd created the scenario that exposed the truth, he'd felt alive in ways he'd forgotten were possible. Not because the work was glamorous or well paid, but because it used every part of who he was. The tactical thinking, the careful observation, the ability to read what people didn't say. He'd felt like himself, fully, completely himself. "Yeah," he signed to Lily, "I do feel like myself more than I have in a long time." "Then you should keep doing it," she signed with the absolute certainty only children possess, "but in a way that doesn't make you forget to watch birds with me." "Deal," Daniel signed, pulling her into a hug. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and began drafting a proposal. Not a resignation, but a redefinition. He worked past midnight, refining language and structure, building a framework for what his role at Crosstech could become. The next morning, he requested a meeting with Evelyn. They met not in her office, but in a coffee shop near Daniel's apartment. Neutral ground, away from corporate formality. "I've been thinking about the position," Daniel said after they'd ordered, "and I want to continue working with you, but with some changes to how we structure it." Evelyn set down her coffee cup, giving him complete attention. "I'm listening." "The work you need doesn't require someone in the office 8 hours a day. What you need is someone who can see patterns others miss, who can investigate when necessary, who can assess security concerns both external and internal. That's project-based work, not daily operations. You want to be a consultant rather than full-time staff. I want to be available when you actually need my specific skills rather than present just to be present, which means some weeks I might work 40 hours, other weeks, maybe 10. But the hours I do work would be maximally effective because they'd be focused on actual problems rather than performative presence." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, thinking. "That's not how corporate security typically works." "I'm not typical corporate security. I'm someone who sees what others miss because I learned to watch the world through my daughter's eyes. Someone who understands that the most important communications happen in silence. Someone who quit a career specifically to prioritize being a father and isn't willing to reverse that choice entirely. But you're willing to do both, be a father and do this work, if the structure allows it." "Yes. If the structure respects that Lily comes first, always, and the work fits around her needs rather than the other way around." Evelyn smiled slightly. "You know, most people would have just taken the full-time position, cashed the checks, and hired more childcare to cover the schedule conflicts. I'm not most people." "No, you're definitely not." Evelyn pulled out her tablet, made some notes. "What would you need for this to work?" Specifically, Daniel outlined his proposal. Retainer-based compensation that provided stable income but acknowledged variable hours, complete autonomy over scheduling with guaranteed response time for genuine emergencies, and clear boundaries about after-hours contact. He'd be available for investigation work, security assessment, pattern analysis, and strategic planning. He would not be available for routine meetings, general surveillance, or anything that could be handled by traditional security staff. Basically, you want to be called in when there's an actual problem, not kept around just in case problems arise, Evelyn summarized. Exactly. And in exchange, when you do call, you get my complete focus and expertise without corporate politics or bureaucratic overhead. Evelyn extended her hand. Deal. I'll have Barbara draw up a new contract. And Daniel? This is actually smarter structuring than what I originally proposed. You're thinking about sustainable effectiveness rather than just filling a position. They shook hands, and Daniel felt something settle in his chest, relief maybe, or the satisfaction of finding a path that honored both versions of who he was. Over the next 2 weeks, the fallout from Vale's exposure continued to unfold. The district attorney's office filed criminal charges for witness tampering and conspiracy. Crosstech's board launched a comprehensive investigation that uncovered the full extent of Vale's network, not just the 3 board members Daniel had identified, but 2 additional executives who'd been feeding information to Meridian Group in exchange for promised positions after the acquisition. The Meridian Group itself faced scrutiny, with regulators investigating whether their acquisition attempt constituted corporate espionage. Their CEO resigned, their stock dropped 18%, and their board issued public apologies while quietly settling lawsuits. Richard Pemberton resigned in disgrace after his financial dealings were exposed. Susan Chen negotiated a quiet departure with severance and a non-disparagement agreement. James Wolcott faced criminal charges and a civil suit from Crosstech for breach of fiduciary duty. Through all of it, Daniel worked on specific assignments Evelyn requested, analyzing communication patterns to identify other potential security risks, reviewing Crosstech's information security protocols, conducting discrete background checks on new board candidates. The work was engaging, important, and crucially, it fit around his schedule with Lily. He attended her parent-teacher conference and learned she was reading at 6th grade level now. He chaperoned her class field trip to the Natural History Museum. He sat with her every evening for their promised hour of undivided attention, watching her grow more confident and articulate, seeing her process the changes in their lives with the resilience children possessed when they felt secure in their parents' presence. Mrs. Morrison, their neighbor, noticed the transformation. "You seem different," she told Daniel one evening when he picked up Lily after a late meeting. "Lighter, somehow." Daniel thought about that observation. Lighter. Yes, that was exactly right. He'd spent 8 years carrying the weight of unfulfilled potential, of skills unused, of a self he'd carefully buried to prioritize safety and stability. Now he was using those skills again, but in a way that didn't require sacrificing what mattered most. Lighter. Like metamorphosis had shed the cocoon. 6 weeks after the courthouse hearing, Evelyn invited Daniel to a Crosstech board meeting, not to work security, but to be publicly recognized. He almost declined, uncomfortable with visibility, but Lily convinced him. "People should know what you did," she signed. "It's okay to be seen when you do good things." So Daniel wore the one suit he owned, purchased for a funeral years ago and rarely touched since, and stood in Crosstech's Manhattan headquarters while Evelyn addressed the board and assembled staff. "Most of you know the basic facts of what happened with Marcus Vale," Evelyn began. "What you don't know is how close we came to losing everything. Vale's conspiracy was sophisticated, comprehensive, and would have succeeded if not for one person's attention to detail and willingness to act." She gestured to Daniel. Daniel Reed was a maintenance worker at the Harrington Crown Hotel. He noticed what everyone else missed, that I was being held at gunpoint in a public lobby. Instead of panicking or ignoring what he saw, he created a tactical response that saved my life without escalating danger. When I asked him to help investigate Vale's network, he uncovered patterns our professional security team had missed. And when Vale made his final move, Daniel orchestrated the scenario that exposed the entire conspiracy. The room applauded, and Daniel felt acutely uncomfortable being the focus of so much attention. But he also felt something else, pride maybe, or satisfaction that his skills had mattered, that choosing to act rather than stay invisible had led to genuine good. Beyond his professional contribution, Evelyn continued, Daniel has taught me something crucial about leadership. He could have taken a full-time position here, could have prioritized career advancement over personal responsibility. Instead, he insisted on structuring his work around being present for his daughter. And that choice, putting family first, maintaining boundaries, refusing to sacrifice what matters for corporate prestige, that's the kind of integrity I want this company to embody. She turned to face the assembled staff. We're implementing new policies based on Daniel's example. Flexible scheduling for parents, project-based work structures that honor people's lives outside these walls, and recognition that presence doesn't equal productivity. Crosstech became successful because of innovation and quality work. Those things don't require sacrificing family or personal well-being. More applause, this time with genuine enthusiasm. Daniel saw employees exchanging meaningful looks, saw the hope in faces that suggested these policy changes mattered deeply. After the meeting, several staff members approached Daniel to thank him, not for exposing Vail, but for advocating for work-life balance in a way that might actually change corporate culture. My daughter has a recital next month, one woman told him, eyes bright. I've been dreading asking for time off. Now I won't have to choose between her performance and my job security. My son's special needs require flexible scheduling, another man said. I've been terrified of losing this position because most companies won't accommodate that. You just made it possible for me to be both a good father and a good employee. Daniel realized then that the impact of his choices extended far beyond stopping one conspiracy. By insisting on boundaries, by refusing to sacrifice family for career, he'd given permission for others to do the same. He'd helped create space for people to be whole human beings rather than just corporate resources. That evening, he took Lily to dinner at her favorite pizza place. Nothing fancy, just a neighborhood spot where they knew his order and where Lily could watch the pizza makers through the window, fascinated by the choreography of dough tossing and sauce spreading. The board meeting was good, she signed between bites. It was good. A lot of attention on me, which felt weird, but also good to see that the work mattered. Mrs. Chen says when you use your gifts to help others, that's called service. She says it's one of the most important things people can do. Daniel smiled at his daughter's wisdom, at how she absorbed lessons about kindness and purpose and turned them into frameworks for understanding the world. Mrs. Chen is right. What gifts do you think you have? Lily considered the question seriously. I'm good at noticing things, at seeing when people are sad even when they smile, at understanding what people mean even when they can't find words. Those are very special gifts. I learned them from you, she signed. You taught me to watch carefully, to pay attention, to see what's really happening instead of just what people want you to see. And you taught me that those skills matter, Daniel signed back. That watching carefully isn't just about security or investigation. It's about care, about seeing people fully, especially when they feel invisible. They finished dinner and walked home through streets where autumn was giving way to early winter, where lights in apartment windows told stories of other families having their own quiet evenings, where the city's noise faded into something almost peaceful. At home, while Lily did homework, Daniel checked his email and found a message from Dr. Sarah Kim. Mr. Reed, I wanted to thank you properly for giving me the courage to stand up to Marcus Vail. I've been offered a research position at MIT with better funding and the opportunity to continue my quantum encryption work. More importantly, I learned that having integrity sometimes means taking risks, and that people like you exist who will support you when you do. My father's medical care is stable now, and I no longer feel like I have to compromise my ethics for financial security. You changed my life. Thank you. Daniel read the message twice, feeling the ripple effects of that morning in the hotel lobby extending into futures he couldn't have imagined. One choice to help, one moment of choosing action over invisibility, and now Dr. Kim was at MIT, thousands of Crosstech employees had better work-life policies, and a conspiracy that would have destroyed a company had been stopped. Small choices, massive consequences. His phone rang. Evelyn. Daniel, I have a proposition. Before you say no, hear me out. I'm listening. Crosstech is establishing a foundation focused on supporting families with disabled children, funding for medical care, educational resources, assistive technology, advocacy programs. I want to name it the Lily Reed Foundation, if you and your daughter would allow that. Daniel's throat tightened. Evelyn, it's appropriate. Your daughter taught you to see the world differently, and those skills saved my company. Lily's way of observing and communicating became the foundation for everything that followed. She deserves to be recognized for that gift. I don't know what to say. Say yes, and then let me set up an education fund for her. Full ride to any college she chooses, graduate school included. The money Vail tried to steal from Crosstech? A portion of it is going into that fund. Your daughter's future is secure, Daniel. You never have to worry about affording her education or opportunities. Daniel looked across the room at Lily, bent over her homework, tongue sticking out slightly in concentration, completely unaware that her life had just changed in fundamental ways. Yes, he said quietly. Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you. After hanging up, Daniel sat with the magnitude of it. Not just the money, though that was life-changing, but the recognition that Lily's way of seeing the world had value beyond their small apartment and daily routines. That her deafness, which her mother had seen as tragedy, had actually been a gift that taught both of them to communicate in ways that transcended words. That evening, after Lily was in bed, Daniel stood in her doorway watching her sleep, her hands curled in that perpetual readiness to speak. He thought about all the choices that had led to this moment, leaving security work to be present for her, taking the maintenance job that paid less but allowed consistency, learning sign language not as accommodation but as primary communication, teaching her that observation was power and silence was its own language. Every choice had felt like sacrifice at the time. Every step down in salary or status had seemed like failure by conventional measures. But those choices had built something else. A relationship with his daughter built on attention and presence, skills that let him see what others missed, and ultimately the ability to act when action mattered most. The Invisible Man had saved a CEO, exposed a conspiracy, protected thousands of jobs, and changed corporate policies to honor family commitment. All because he'd learned to see the world through his daughter's eyes. 3 months later, Daniel stood in a hotel conference room, not the Harrington Crown this time, but a smaller venue hosting the Lily Reed Foundation's inaugural event. The room was filled with families whose children had disabilities, with advocates and educators and medical professionals, all gathering to celebrate the foundation's launch and the resources it would provide. Lily stood beside Daniel wearing her favorite dress, hands moving in animated conversation with another deaf child whose parents looked relieved and grateful to find a community that understood their experience. Evelyn approached, looking more relaxed than Daniel had seen her since that first desperate morning. The foundation has already received over 500 applications for assistance. We're going to make a real difference. You already have, Daniel said, watching Lily laugh at something her new friend signed. We, Evelyn corrected. This is partnership, Daniel. You taught me that the most valuable security isn't cameras and guards. It's people who pay attention, who see each other fully, who refuse to accept invisibility as the price of safety. Miguel appeared with his wife and 2 kids, grinning. Fancy seeing you here. Last time I saw you, you were mopping floors. Now you're hobnobbing with CEOs and running foundations. Consulting for one CEO and attending one foundation launch, Daniel corrected. I still live in the same apartment and take the same subway. Yeah, but now you do it without looking like the weight of the world is crushing you. Miguel's expression turned serious. I'm proud of you, man. You saw someone who needed help and you helped. That's rare. Mrs. Chen, Lily's teacher, came over to introduce herself to Evelyn and discuss the foundation's educational programs. Dr. Kim arrived and gave Daniel a hug, introducing her father, a man in his 70s who shook Daniel's hand with trembling gratitude. My daughter tells me you saved her from making a terrible mistake, he said in accented English, that you gave her courage to do what was right even when it was dangerous. She saved herself, Daniel said. I just created the opportunity. Patricia appeared with a small boy who signed hello to Lily with careful, newly learned gestures. My nephew, Patricia explained. He lost his hearing last year from meningitis. We've been struggling to find resources and community. This foundation is going to change his life. All around the room, stories unfolded of people whose lives would be touched by the foundation's work. Children who would receive assistive technology, families who would get financial support, communities that would find connection and understanding. And at the center of it all was Lily, not symbolically, but literally, as she moved through the room making friends with other deaf children, showing them her bird-watching notebook, teaching them signs with the patient precision of someone who knew that communication was a gift you gave carefully. Daniel watched his daughter become the heart of something that would outlast both of them, would touch lives they'd never meet, would create ripples extending into futures they couldn't imagine. Later, as the event wound down and families began departing, Evelyn pulled Daniel aside. "I have one more thing to discuss. Crosstech is expanding our corporate security model based on what you've taught us. We want to train other companies to look beyond traditional security measures, to value observation and pattern recognition, to understand that the most dangerous threats often come from inside and look legitimate until someone knows how to really see. You want me to help develop that training? I want you to lead it, not full-time. Your consulting arrangement stays exactly as it is. But periodic workshops, maybe quarterly, teaching what you know about reading people and situations, sharing the skills that stopped Vale." Daniel considered the proposal. It would mean occasional travel, public speaking, sharing knowledge he'd developed through years of careful observation. It would mean further visibility, more recognition, stepping even further from the invisibility he'd once cultivated so carefully. It would also mean helping others develop skills that could prevent the kind of conspiracy he'd uncovered, that could protect companies and employees from people like Vale who used legitimacy as camouflage. "I'll do it," he said, "on one condition. Lily comes with me to workshops when scheduling allows. Let people see that the skills I'm teaching came from learning to communicate with my deaf daughter. Let them understand that diversity of experience creates security advantages, that what looks like limitation can actually be enhanced capability." Evelyn smiled. "I love that. And yes, absolutely." As they were leaving the event, Lily tugged on Daniel's sleeve and signed, "This was because of me?" "This was because of you teaching me to see the world differently," Daniel signed back. "Your way of observing and communicating saved someone's life and started all of this. You should be very proud." "I'm proud of you," Lily signed, "for being brave, for helping people, for still having time to watch birds with me." Daniel pulled her close, feeling the completeness of a life that had transformed from invisible maintenance worker to security consultant, from single father barely making rent to foundation namesake with his daughter's future secured, from someone who hid his skills to someone who shared them to protect others. The metamorphosis was complete, not caterpillar to butterfly, that was too simple, more like invisible to visible, silent observer to active participant, survival mode to purposeful living. And through it all, Lily had been both teacher and anchor, showing him that the most important watching wasn't surveillance but care, that the most powerful communication happened in silence, and that being seen mattered less than seeing others fully. They took the subway home, Lily leaning against his shoulder, tired from the evening's excitement. Other passengers ignored them, just another father and daughter heading home, invisible in the city's endless flow of people. But Daniel no longer needed invisibility for safety. He'd learned that being seen, being present, being willing to act when others turned away, that was its own kind of security. The train rattled through tunnels, carrying them toward their small apartment where homework waited and breakfast would need making, and the ordinary routines of life continued regardless of foundation launches or corporate consulting. And that ordinariness was perfect. Because the most important security work Daniel would ever do wasn't stopping conspiracies or exposing corruption. It was being present for the small person beside him, teaching her that her way of seeing the world was valuable, showing her through actions that courage meant choosing to help even when helping was risky, and demonstrating every single day that being her father was the greatest privilege of his life. The invisible man had become visible not through seeking attention, but through refusing to look away when someone needed help. And in that single choice, to read a desperate sign in a hotel lobby and act on what he saw, Daniel had discovered that the smallest gestures could transform entire worlds. One sign for help, one choice to respond. And everything changed. Lily stirred against his shoulder, hands moving in sleep signing, practicing conversations she'd have tomorrow with her new friends. Daniel smiled, pulled her closer, and let the subway carry them home. where the most important work of all was waiting, being present, paying attention, and watching the world through eyes that had learned to see what others missed. It turned out that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.